Okay, so looking at the first few clips, again, just going back through those key questions. Do you identify a problem pre-set? Do you identify a problem after the teams have come together and the referee's called set? And after the throw-in, who is dominant? So let's look at those clips for the first time right now.
You're muted, Chris.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, so as we stop that share, I'm going to introduce those who haven't used Mentimeter before to this new tool. And then we'll go over those clips one by one and see if we can extract a couple of key bits and pieces that will hopefully get us more on the same page as it comes to Scrum setup. So if you bear with me a moment, I will pull up the Mentimeter. Okay, so to get onto this, I will send you the link into the chat right now. So you go to menti.com. It works on a laptop or a tablet or a cell phone if you have a smartphone. And the code is 7322924. So I will take that link and I will pop it in the chat. So you should be able to see, if you click on that link or tap on that link directly, it will ask you to enter a word for Scrum 1 or clip 1, I should say. Don't do so right away. I will pop it up on my screen. If you want to watch it on your own screen, you can. And I just want to identify, as that Scrum is getting set up, if you can identify a problem. So that could be, there's no stability. That could be, one team is already moving before any other team is stable. That could mean a whole plethora of things. It could be an individual player who's in a poor body shape. Do you identify any problems? Or if you see that, geez, that scrum looks pretty good to me, you can say it looks stable or no problems. So it will ask you to enter a word and then you click submit. So I'll give it a few seconds and then I will pop up onto my screen the video. So we'll go to clip 1. So if you wanted to watch it on your own time, and then I will tell you when to fire that into the Mentimeter. So if you can hold your observation. So clip number 1, looking at the setup of the scrum. Just going to pause to see, can you share the Menti group code again? Okay, I will. I'll pop that into the chat if that's okay. I'm just going to navigate back. Okay. Keys to the code is 732292 and 4. 732292 and 4. Okay. So let's go back into the clip. So we're looking at clip number 1. Perfect. We'll stop it there. And I'll just navigate back to my other screen. So fire in when you can, any issues you see at the setup. And that could be before the ball comes in, after the ball comes in, at crouch, at binds, anything that jumps out as that scrum is set up. Okay, we have 8 answers so far. We'll give it another second. Sweet. So on the screen, you'll see, obviously the words will change positions and all that. The tool is pretty cool. If there's anything that's repeated, the text gets bigger. But as we see here, we've got a pretty good diversity of response. So starting from the top, second row, moving feet, poor engage, loose head overextended, height, the blue 8, the number 8 out on blind. That's a bugbear for some people. The back row is not being connected before we say crouch. The loose head, shoulders lower, the put in loose high, shoulders below hips, distance. So, and then the word unstable. So if we go back, so just having a look at all those pieces, and it's important to understand that what we do in refereeing is largely perception based. We can translate all this into, okay, we have an issue at set piece in terms of the setup. So if we go back to, there we go, our initial setup, and I will break one of my own rules and we'll slow this down. Normally it's good to watch things at real speed, but if we slow this down, we can maybe talk through some of these issues that folks see. person coming in. So here we see, after crouch, bind call coming in from the referee. Legs go back. Good break foot maintenance as well, if I may add. And set. And our problems come post set, if that makes sense. So keeping that in mind, we'll jump to the second clip here. And I'll flash up on the screen just some of the things we said initially. So we had a lot of differences of opinion in terms of the problem, but the one thing that we had all in common was the setup of the scrum didn't lead to stability. And we actually ended up with a free kick as well. So let's move to the second clip. And I will end this question. I will pose you the same question one more time. So in clip 2, do we have any observations or problems? So what I will do, again, someone's just come into the room. Great. So if you have not been able to answer that first one, I'll pop the Mentimeter code. So again, it's menti.com 732292 and 4. All right. And again, that's menti.com. And I will put up clip number 2. Okay, clip number 2 coming now. Sweet. So if you can fire into the Mentimeter, I'll bring the screen back up. Any problems that you might have seen, or again, if you haven't seen a problem, you can say it's stable, and we'll go from there. Sweet, another few seconds. Awesome. So if we look at our answers here, stable and straight, tight, second row folded, we have a number 6. So we're looking at what they're doing. Maybe 6 angles. So a lot of these pieces are, I guess, more minute, and I guess the outcome is the same. The ball actually ends up in the first receiver's hands as opposed to a free kick. And just quickly before we move on, this has nothing to do with the actual referee decision making. This is just what's important and how we can be aware and zoom in to actually what matters in setting up a scrum, if that makes sense. So scrum 1 to scrum 2, obviously we had a bit more dramas in scrum 1. And scrum 2, a little bit less to worry about. So what are those ingredients? Let's just hop into a different share here, and then I'll pause for a couple of comments and bits and pieces. But if we were to go into our key focus areas, this grid that you may or may not have seen before, obviously there's those 16 boxes, and some of those pieces are what I would refer to as foundational and contextual. So what is scrum dominance? Obviously at its core, it's one team going forward and one team going backward. But if it was that simple, well, anyone would do this job, and we would not have reason for this chat on Wednesday night. But yeah, 6 scrum setup is obviously what we're focusing on at first. What we try to communicate to get players and coaches on the same page is what that means in terms of team. So obviously being aligned to the left, maintaining a strong and comfortable position throughout, words that we've developed with coaches. And then, but what does that look like from a referee point of view? We basically have our scrum set up with, alignment obviously to the left, because that's where, legally we have to have heads being put, binding strong and on the body, not on arms, not on legs, that kind of thing. And stability, what does that mean for referees? Is no movement after bind and before set. So if we just take a moment to pause on this component of what we actually need to be doing at a scrum setup, if you wanted to have a look back at those clips, knowing that this is primarily what we want to achieve, would you have a different answer? And I'll just leave that open to the group. If you want to fire it in the chat or unmute yourself, we'll go from there. Question coming in from Sam KL. So what is meant by aligning to the left? Well, Sam, so naturally in the scrum, the law says we have to have the head to the left. So we have to have our head to the left of opponent's head. So if you're a loose head prop, number one, scrummaging against a tight head prop, you put your head on the left-hand side. So starting from the very core of the scrum, now that we have this piece, that is the break foot, it's actually a really cool tool for us. The hooker will have their break foot forward, and as long as the hooker's break foot is left of the other hooker's break foot, if everyone is in line and in a position to push straight, again, which is legally required, their heads and bodies should be to the left of the opponent directly in front of them, if that makes sense. So when we say alignment and to the left, that's the building block. That's the foundation of legal, safe, and successful scrummaging. Sweet. So just as a takeaway, as a little plan, so just building this down, obviously this one little snappy box is all well and good, but we have to make sure that we have something that we can take away and understand. And normally that results in a plan. So when we talk about Scrum setup, the acronym ABS has been used a couple of times. We tell kids, you need core strength, you have to have abs. What does that mean? Alignment, bind, and stability. So alignment, legally now, hookers are required to maintain the break foot. That could be the left or the right foot. It's generally the right foot based on the dynamics of the scrum, in a 15-a-side scrum, I should say. So that's left of their opponent's foot. If we look at the clips once more, we can actually see that in both examples of 1 and 2, that's done very well by both of the referees, and the front row players, we must say. So if we pause right here, just pop this up on my screen. So if you're able to see the clips right on the screen, we've got both hookers have their break feet out early, both of the right feet, and they're to the left of their opposition. So that's kind of line 1, item 1. And as a result, if everyone is setting up in a position to push straight, shoulders are out and everyone's aligned and bound together like they should, we have that alignment piece achieved. Now, generally before crouch, this is easy. Pre-crouch, it might change. And if we're not even at bind yet, we have the opportunity to reset if we need to. But this is done very well in clip 1. And it's also done really well in clip 2. If we see, we have a break foot, which is left of the opponent's break foot. Shoulders are out. Everyone's in line. So we don't have an issue with that first step of the process, which is alignment. As we move to the second phase, bind, we want to make sure that the pressure, so on the bind, we have players that maintain that strong, comfortable position. Effectively, we just want to make sure that there's a moment of stability before set. So if we check in on each of these clips, let's just make sure that we've ticked that box. Because again, when we're looking at footage, as match officials, we got to make sure we've taken care of our responsibility before we start looking at individual players. A lot of people at that very first clip started to look at, different players and what their job was individually. I see in the chat that, there's mentions of tight head props and all that. And yes, Mark, technically both feet can be used as brakes, but it's, you can use your left or your right one. Just on the dynamics of a scrum and where the weight comes from, I see it as a huge disadvantage to use the left foot, but that's for another discussion. But effectively, what we want to be able to do is create that stability throughout the process so that once the ball's introduced, the teams have an equitable opportunity to see who can push better, which is at the core of what a scrum is. So if we move on to that bind phase, we're looking for that moment of stability. So if we go back to our first clip, the referee says bind, the feet adjust, and we have that moment of stability before set. So sometimes it's bind set timing. But here we can say that as the referee calls bind, there's virtually no foot movement once the referee calls set, and then the scrum starts to move after that in this first clip. In the second clip, similar setup, referee calls bind, feet go back, perfect moment of stability before set. A little bit more stable than the first one. We're able to get the ball in. It's a bit of channel 1 ball and, number 8 carries. But there's some common ground here between those two first examples, which is we have that moment of stability before set. And some of you might have heard it said before, this is the number 1 job of the referee. If you're not very confident with your scrum setup or your understanding, the ability to give players time and space to adjust after you call bind before you call set is pretty much the number 1 remedy we can offer for scrums and negates most problems at most levels of the game. But that final piece of the abs process would be the stability piece. So again, moment of stability before the throw in or before the put in. And then we can start looking at, what is a strong leg angle. And some people coach their props. And again, this is not our responsibility to coach the props, but some people insist on a starting position of a 90-degree leg angle. So that would be, your hip, knee, ankle in relation to each other, all being at 90 degrees. Some people say the 1 o'clock piece, which is in relation to, knee, hip angle. And then others say, that hip, knee, ankle, 120 degrees is ideal. But again, as referees, all we need to know is what a strong position looks like and what a very weak position looks like. So obviously someone with, very, very closed hips and knees and they're almost on the ground is a problem. And obviously someone with their hips in the air and their legs straight is a problem because, again, the law says very simply, are they in a position to push without standing up or falling to the ground? So let's go back and look at those scrum clips once more. And let's see if we can identify any issues. So here we get to the bind. we have that moment of stability, and then we have the set. And then we can start to identify, do we have any clear issues that we need to deal with? Does anyone want to stop and introduce any comments or feedback at this point? Sweet. So just running through, like, obviously we have a prop that has a leg angle that's, 90 or maybe a little bit more than 90. We don't see them. We're not looking for micro pictures. We're looking for macro pictures and threats to stability before that ball's introduced. Here, a little bit of a straighter leg, and then maybe we can indicate what's happened afterwards. Referee identifies that the threat to stability came from the prop that is overleaned. This is a term that's been used quite a bit, but we can absolutely reset scrums like this. But if we see that one prop is in an acceptable position to push and the other prop is probably in a less than ideal position to push with straight legs and then having that head come forward, we have a decision at our disposal. So it doesn't matter whether you decide to reset or whether you decide to free kick, as long as it's based on a process. And here the referee decides that this player has overleaned. And if we go back and look at that free kick, we can follow why the referee got to that position where we have that straight leg. And again, the head way up underneath the chest, almost underneath the hips of the opposition, which some coaches refer to as overleaning, which would be a poor loose head shape, not to get too technical. In the second one, we look at the preset pictures, again, looking at the angles of the prop's legs, as long as their leg shapes look strong. They get into that 90 position. This player, probably 120. But again, 120, 90, no massive threats to stability. We can move on. Sweet. So it's not as exciting as watching scrums go 5, 6, 7 meters backwards. But as we said before, those foundational skills are, can we get the alignment, bind, stability right before the ball comes in? And arguably, it will make the next piece of the process easier to understand, and it won't have any kind of false interpretation, so to speak. And just looking at the chat, yeah, BK, you say losses break foot, not break feet. Maybe Mark was referring to like either foot could be used. You cannot use both feet simultaneously, but it is possible to put your left foot forward because the law doesn't say left or right. It just says break foot. But again, looking at most of the coaches in the room would probably insist that the right foot is indeed uses the break foot. So let's move on to the next phase, which would be, sorry, before we get to the line out clips, if we look at clips 3 and 4, we will move beyond the setup. But if you see all 6 front row players or all 16 players, just as we get to this stage, I'm going to pause it right at the set, and I'm going to pop up another Mentimeter, and we'll just see if we can identify who we think is the person who is the most under pressure, or the team. So if you give me 1 sec, I will get back into our Mentimeter. And we will start to look at scrum dominance, which, assuming we've done our homework and we've set up the scrum properly, should be pretty clear and obvious in most scrums, but sometimes a little more difficult in others. Very good. So I will pop this on the screen. All right, so new code for you, 6245526. I'll pop that in the chat. 6245526. And yeah, Joel, just before we move on, it's really, so obviously in under 19s, we have to have the same amount of people on both sides of the scrum, but senior rugby, occasionally, we lose a flanker or a number 8 or anyone to a yellow card, for example. And we have that disparity in weight. So that makes our job so much more important to make sure that we have that moment of stability, between bind and set, so that we can make sure that if the disparity of weight came through, it came through after the ball was introduced, which, as the law says, that's when the pushing is supposed to start. I will show you that. So 6245526. And again, we're going to ask, which individual do you think is under the most pressure? And you can rank those. So you have your black and white, loose head and tight head, and then your purple, loose head and tight head. And I'll pop this on my screen just in case you don't have it active on yours. And again, you could go into clip 3 from those videos that I sent out. Duck. So again, not focusing too much on the setup on this scrum. But if we look at the ball being introduced, can we identify which individual is under the most pressure? Sweet. Let's go back to this one. Okay, as we can see here, we have in first place the black and white striped tight head prop. In second, the black/white loose head prop. A couple of people saying the purple tight head prop and purple loose head prop. So let's go back just to make sure that we have clarity on this. When we say under pressure, we have to go back to that moment where, the ball's being introduced. We've accepted at this point that our setup is good. We have that moment of stability before set, moment of stability before the ball being introduced. And now here's where we have to be strategic. And this is where that contextual piece comes in. Which team is going forward? So assuming everything is legal, everyone's attached, we see a forward step from both sides of the scrum of the purple team. So we must then, like we did in the breakdown, look at the team who is under pressure. So the black and white team are going backwards. They're losing the pushing contest. And then we start looking at who would be the threat to stability. Because obviously there's nothing illegal about this. A team getting pushed off the ball. And then we actually end up with a pretty safe and acceptable outcome. We get a turnover. So if you're the black and white team, you're probably not happy to lose your ball. But purple get what they need, which is the ball out. So let's try a different dynamic. So I will pose the same question to you about clip number 4. So again, let's try to avoid looking at too in detail the setup of the scrum before the ball's in, but we'll skip right to when the ball is introduced. And can we identify the individual that we feel is the most under pressure and go down through the ranks here? Again, we'll look at it one more time collectively. Sweet. So a lot of people. So number 1, black and white tight head prop coming in at number 2 under the most pressure. Black and white loose head prop and then obviously third and fourth. And the cool thing is we're seeing a little bit of a shift in, the purple tight head and purple loose head. And even though we are generally refereeing the team that's under the most pressure, we still have to make sure that the dominance is legal. So even though we see someone who's under a ton of pressure, is that what their opponent is doing to them, is it legal? So let's go back to our picture once again. We get the ball being introduced. As soon as the ball comes in, we see that surge coming forward from the black team. The white team obviously have to do something to cope with this pressure. The loose head does a reasonable job, but again, we have an indicator here of a straight leg, no longer in a position to push, but continues to go backwards. And then we obviously get a bit of a turn, and we have this picture here, which is the loose head from black with almost nowhere to go. And then we see the head of the tight head player from white. So, and just being very conscious, if we're near the goal line and we have this picture, this is where we need to either have the ball come out immediately or blow our whistle, because we cannot allow this scrum to end up being in a situation where some people are standing up, other people are bent over, and we have, hands around necks and things as people go forward. So this is the moment where this scrum needs to stop, as we see the referee doing so with a penalty here, if that makes. So where do we need to spend most of our time? Like we said earlier, just popping it back to our plan. If we look at how do we plan to have scrum setup success, again, going back to our alignment, binding, stability. So if we are having trouble distinguishing who is dominant, so if you're really struggling with your contextual piece, I would suggest going back to this before we move, onto your understanding of individual front row players, because often we forget to do one of these steps, either making sure people are left, or just pausing before we call set, which are controllables in our right. And then we start looking at individual props and, blowing penalties left and right, that don't necessarily paint the picture that everyone can understand, which ultimately is our goal, beyond the safety of the players, of course, which is paramount. Sweet. So anything else on scrum setup or rewarding legal dominance before we head to line out? You can fire it in the chat or feel free to unmute. Question from Steve Bennett: is the bind of the loose head considered legal? Let's have a look. I'm assuming we're looking at clip number 4. Three. Okay. Just looking at the bind of the loose head. The loose head from Kamloops, from black and purple here. Sweet. So we have bind, and then we have set. So the one thing that props are allowed to do is readjust their bind, as long as it's on the body. So it can't be on the shorts, it can't be on the arm. And here we see it's legal. Now, the one thing you might have heard on TV, whether it's Major League Rugby or the World Cup, a little bit less in the last couple of years, was, elbow down, this, that, and the other. There's nothing in law that says where you have to point your elbow. The law says you have to bind on the body, not the arm, not the shorts. The law also says you cannot exert any downward pressure. So we see the person's pulling on the jersey here. A good indication of exerting downward pressure. We kind of see that elbow just starting down and staying where it is, and it's on the jersey here. So yeah, I don't really have an issue in law with that bind. So again, going here, it's on the body, it stays on the body, bit of a downward elbow, then gets that elbow sideways, which is actually a really good technique for those of you who coach, being able to just push that body backwards and exert pressure through the bind. So yeah, no problems with that micro picture. Okay, two things before we move on. Oh yes, and BK 100%. Suggesting the ref spends more time on the non-put inside. And a lot of you said it in your answers. If we look at this scrum, the primary battle in modern scrummaging, because we have that obligation to hook, there's a lot more pressure on the put in side. So being on this non-put in loose head side, this is the key battle. This player's job is to disrupt. This player's job is not to go backwards. So if we're making sure that that contest is clear, it's a good place to stand, so to speak. Yeah, on the jersey piece, unfortunately, as long as the jersey is legal, Steve, there's nothing that we can do about that bind. The bind's legal, and something might suggest that even if people are unsatisfied with this bind, this body position is mainly the problem. We have kind of a straight leg, kind of a 4 o'clock picture. The left leg is way back here, so we just have one team. And then, yeah, although I wouldn't penalize this action, this is generally an indication of pressure. Just talking about binds before we move on, binding on the shorts is not legal, Darren. This is not on the shorts. This is on his jersey. The interesting thing is, what we'll see at a slightly higher level of rugby is this black and white tight head prop will actually drive their knees to the ground, and they'll transfer it because the referee's on the far side. They'll transfer their bind onto the arm of the loose head, trying to roll the loose head inwards and down towards the hooker, just to negate that picture. And then you might get an appearance of a whip wheel. And again, I don't like using those terms, because the macro picture is, did we get that moment of stability? Do we have any clear and obvious infringements? If the answer is no, then we look at the team that's going backwards. And here we see the tight heads under the most pressure. Do we need to penalize them? No, because we get a turnover and good possession, and they haven't done anything illegal, which is great. So let's move on to line out maul, which I think is a lot more difficult to referee than the scrum, just because we have different amounts of people and a plethora of legal tactics. So these clips are clips 5 through 11, and we will focus on these 3 points as you watch those clips. So number one, how is the line out itself set up? So is there a reasonable gap between the players throughout the line out? Are the players that have to be in certain positions in those positions, so that defensive player in the 5-meter channel doesn't have to be the opposition hooker? Most teams put a 9 in there nowadays, depending on where they are in the field, but they have to have someone there. Moving on to the contest, is the contest on the air fair and legal? Is the contest on the ground fair and legal? And then if we do get a maul formation, who is dominant? So let's look at clip number 5, but I'm going to pull up while you guys do that on your own screens, our next little mentee activity. So for this next one, I'll just get you to watch all 3 clips in succession, clips 5, 6, and 7 on your playlist there. And the question I'll ask is, after you've watched those clips 5, 6, and 7, what are 3 common ways in the modern game that teams defend line out maul. So I will pop this Menti code in the chat. And then if you would like, you can go through those clips on your own, 5, 6, and 7. So the code 16095903. And then again, that's menti.com. So 3 ways you can type in 3 different answers. That's the limit I put on it. And we'll go from there. And while you're doing that, I will put all the clips up on slow motion on my screen. So again, watch all 3 clips, 5, 6, and 7 before weighing in. So on my screen, I'm just coming to the end of clip number 7. So if you haven't done so already, if you can fire in 3 different answers, if you like, the 3 ways that you feel teams defend lineout maul, or the 3 tactics modern defenses use to defend that very important weapon in try scoring. All right. Another couple of seconds, but as you see on the screen, sack came up a few times. That's why it's quite big. And then we'll look at what that looks like in a second. Collapse, well, I mean, hopefully it's a legal method of defending. But yes, that is, as we saw at the end of a particular World Cup game, potentially that was a way to defend a maul near the goal line, depending on your opinion. Angle drive to sideline. So yeah, the drive, that's a key piece, drive angle. Counter maul, yeah, counter drive, however you want to put it. The no jump contest, I would say, yeah, that's more of an initial action. Drive it towards the touchline or out of bounds. Love that. No lift, hold, contest in the air, tackle the jumper illegally. Yeah, that's sometimes a contest in the air piece, but yeah, no, I think we're saying the same thing. So let's go back to these clips here. if we can. Apologies, let's get rid of this. Very good. So if we look at the example in clip number 5, like many of you said, we have the one way to defend, which is in the air. So we see green throwing in, white going up into the air and being able to take the ball. And they are able to do exactly that successfully. Clip number 6, we see black stay on the ground. So effectively, we're no longer going to have a contest in the air, because generally speaking, when people stay on the ground, they don't get as high as people who are being lifted. So we have another way to defend, which is as we get the feet on the ground, we have that sack, so to speak, or tackle of the ball carrier. And again, the key would be the person holding the ball and not the lifter. And clip number 7, the third way that we see teams defend, just like the previous one, there's no jump. They stay on the ground, and we see the counter maul or the counter drive. That's actually quite successful, and they are able to go towards the touchline, which is, again, a strategic piece as we see them all lined up over here, which is awesome. So I'm going to bring us to our next Menti piece, if that's all right. We'll just expand on that a little bit. So given that we have 3 different ways, generally speaking, to defend this line out maul situation that's so important for so many teams and so many attacks and exits for that matter, what is the easiest way for us to decide, as not just referees but lovers of the game, which team is dominant in inverted commas after the maul formation? So I've put some options here: number of players, body positions, position of the ball, direction of the drive, the formation of the players. There's different ones there. So some people have already dove in, which is awesome. Yeah, and then we'll see if we can challenge some of that, if that makes sense. So we will look at the next clip. And then the last clip, or second to last, sorry. Clip number 9. Before we go back to our foundational bits and pieces. Sweet. So going back to the ways to defend the maul, obviously we have the sack piece, which we've seen in this picture, teams staying on the ground. Now we know that they either are going to sack or that they're going to counter drive. We see here that the player hits the ground, and immediately we have the opposition jumper who has their hands on their jersey and they're ripping them to the ground, kind of in a scrag tackle motion. And that's what we're being asked to referee. So in the chat, what is the difference between a legal sack and an illegal sack? How would you describe that in a couple of words? Fire that into the chat if you like. Cool. So we see timing and contact in the air, which is the same thing. So yeah, if we look at what is a sack, we use these terms sacks often. Feet on ground from Mark, love that. All the sack is a tackle, and we go back to basics. Who can we tackle? Player holding the ground, player holding the ball whose feet are on the ground. And Phil Webster, very important point. Are we tackling the ball carrier? It's really easy just to grab a hold of one of those lifters who's holding someone else and tackle them, because they're not really in a position to fend you off or drive you off of that contact situation. So those are those things we have to be aware of. Is, did we get our setup right? And is the defense legitimate at source? As we move on to the second style of defense, if we look at a counter drive, what would make a counter drive illegal? Fire that into the chat if you want. So we have one example, a pretty effective counter drive. And then another example of a different style of counter drive. Sweet. BK brought up a very important point. Contact before the jumper. So that early contact piece is not just for sack. Sometimes we see the drive coming in as the feet are still in the air, and we will see this crumbling tower picture. Joining the drive from an offside position. Really good from Raj. And actually, just building on that, often the counter drive originates before. So some players are better painters of pictures. They look like they're driving from a straight position. So if we look at this clip here on screen, it doesn't end up in that way, but we have a player who goes up in the air and they actually end up taking out the lifter in the air. But let's say, because that's not actually what he's trying to do necessarily. A lot of times a single jumper like this will challenge a pod, and they will not do so. He gets it wrong, and he ends up with contact in the air, which is quite an easy penalty to give. But let's say this player lands next to this pod, and this is a lower level of rugby in our divisions, but at a slightly higher level, the other players will come to the point of contest quicker, and this player who's jumped across, I don't know if you've heard that term used before, will square up to the touchline and end up shuffling sideways, just in an effort, not necessarily to turn the ball over, but just to disrupt that maul formation. And good teams, what they'll do is they'll fire the ball at the back, and they will just go to option 2. But again, if they've done everything right, we need to allow them to exploit that. So again, we see the same thing here, or slightly different, but players choose to be on the ground. We don't get a jumping across, but we get a player who ends up in the side at the source. So either joining from the side or from an offside position to begin with, if that makes sense. So arguably, easiest way to decide which team is dominant after maul formation. I'll show you 2 more clips as we close out that will hopefully solidify this for everyone. We see some folks saying the direction of the drive north-south, the number of players, formation of players, body positions, position of the ball, and most folks said, lastly, the direction of the drive east-west. I want to bring up this piece here, which probably is from someone who coached the game a little bit, which I love. Angle drive to sideline or to touchline, or driving teams towards a touchline or out of bounds, or whatever language you want to use. That is generally the goal of any team that is trying to drive against a maul. They're not just trying to push forward, they try to push towards the sideline, even if that means going backwards a little bit. Conversely, the attack trying to push towards the posts. So if we look at the very next clip, so as an indicator, if everything is good with your line out setup, nice big gap, contest in the air is good, maul formation is fine, and we have a maul formed. Sometimes we don't get an initial go forward. In fact, some people might say this maul stalled, it's pushed to the side, and some referees might say use it. Those of you who have coached will go, actually, if I'm the red team, I'm happy because although this maul isn't going forward very quickly, it's starting to move infield towards the posts, or left to right on your screen. And then it picks up momentum, which basically means all of the defenders are in front of their last feet and are under heaps of pressure. And the few defenders left fall to the ground and end up collapsing the maul. And that close to the line with that momentum towards the post and then towards the goal line and a collapse, obviously we have a penalty or penalty try, yellow card decision, depending on where you are. And the last piece we'll leave you with, again, line-out maul is quite complex, but what is the controllable for us before we even get to maul? It's, as we see the referee doing here, setting up our gap, making sure that, okay, teams are going to walk in. That's cool as long as they're in a good line. Bookends are set. Receiver is clear. And that way, if there's going to be a contest, it's going to be fair. The throw is going to be accurate. And we're not going to have any dramas that are unforeseen. Because if we don't set up our lineup properly, we generally tend to have some things that are unpredictable, if that makes sense. So just closing off quickly, because again, I'm conscious of time and apologize for going over our 45 minutes as we endeavor to make things shorter. As we talked about with Scrum setup being foundational, alignment, binding, stability, leading into making more informed decisions on Scrum dominance, our lineout setup is our foundation of making maul dominance more clear. So from a playing and coaching perspective, the front lifter or the back lifter, depending on how you're going to set up your walk in or your in and set, they're arriving early and maintaining that gap, even for your own team. And then all the players are ready without delay. That allows us to not disrupt as referees. From a refereeing point of view, our lineout setup, it starts with setting up the front lifter, or if you have a team that does a proper walk-in, a legal one with one line of players and a clear receiver, you're getting your back lifter to make sure that they support that gap. And obviously you're starting with your front lifter of your defensive team. So they've got that 1 meter plus, and I put 1 meter plus because teams generally step in. So if we can get a little bit more than a meter to start, that's pretty helpful. Getting that defender 2 and 2, especially at developmental levels of rugby, where sometimes players don't know they have to be there. It just creates an even amount of non-participants, and making sure the receivers on both teams are 2 meters away, just so that everything's clear, and that our formation of maul or contest off the lineout is fair. So if we focus on this piece, hopefully it will make these pieces a little bit more clear. So that, is it a good contest in the air, or is it tackling in the air, jumping across, crushing the can, as some people say, landing on lifters, in other words, landing in front or beside. And again, does that maul move towards, if it is all legally formed, towards the touchline or towards the posts, which is our more contextual piece. But if you're still like, wow, this lineup thing is complicated, if we get these pieces right, good gap, everyone's where they're meant to be, this will be either very clear and obvious or will not be a problem, as we saw with Scrum setup. So just on your resources, just on the right, you'll see an example of the feed. A lot of people are engaging with the Coach Logic feed. That's awesome. It's open to absolutely anyone. The ability to get on that system has been sent out to you. If you do not have an account already, there's a link. You go in and create a username and password, and you can dive in. And if you need help getting involved and joining our discussion, using footage from our competitions, let me know, and I'll be happy to walk you through that. The availability survey, if you haven't already done so, in order to get involved on the ground, please fill it out. And then we'll make sure that we get everyone involved in the way we can. I left a link in these notes, which have been sent out, and I will make sure that you have access to online afterwards. And of course, our next referee development session is November the 8th. I've already published the registration link. And the last piece, our Coach Logic theme room. If you haven't been on there, click on this link if you have made a login. And we'd love to see your comments, or even if you're able to go in and make some clips. It doesn't have to be a game you were involved in. It could be anything. If you want to have private conversations, you can say at whoever that person is. If you want to share something with the group, at referees. And again, the more people who contribute, the more I'm able to develop these sessions, because again, these are all based on what's going on the ground, as opposed to just going through every area of the game. Because originally we were going to talk about movement and position, but set piece, and in particular maul, did come up a few times in conversation. 2024 survey. Apologies, Phil. I got ahead of myself. That is the October 2023 survey. I'm not quite a year ahead of ourselves at the moment. Yeah, and Doug Thorpe, who's doing some of our appointments, appreciates your prompt response. And once more, thanks to the 31 referees. We had I believe it was 6 level 1 graduates, for lack of a better term, who came out to the Kamloops Sevens and contributed. That was awesome. And those who from our community and high performance pathways also had a big impact in making sure that tournament ran not only smoothly, but was enjoyable for a lot of folks. Have a look on the Instagram page, BC Referees on Instagram, and BC Rugby Referees on Facebook, and of course your email inbox. And then I'm always available for any queries or support. Enjoy the rugby, especially as we get into the regular season, so to speak, for senior competitions and junior competitions, the 14th, 15th of October. Thanks, everyone. Sorry we went over time, and I will be in touch with all of you shortly. Yeah, Steve Bennett, if you can find a 4th way to defend line out maul, let's do it. Thanks, guys.